I'm Oprah as a dude, and I love you all. All right, here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Reyes Reflection podcast. Thanks for finding your way here. Don't forget to follow me on those socials at I'm Nathanael Reyes and tell somebody about the podcast. Per usual, plugging in those partners real quick, ARAVE cards, the abundance of holiday deals at Jocko Fuel, SMACKIN Sunflower Seeds, and Mad Rabbit Tattoo Aftercare. Today, we have a very special guest with us, a man who's not only a powerhouse in music, but also a voice for change in the foster care system and is a proud survivor himself of the foster care system. He's a talented singer, songwriter, performer whose unique style of soul and nostalgic sounds with a modern twist has landed him on this past season of The Voice and has him touring with Earth, Wind, and Fire, and he has collabed with many other artists. And today, he is gracing us on the Reyes Reflection podcast. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming DREION to the show. Welcome.
Man, thank you so much for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I know you had just ended your tour with Earth, Wind, and Fire, so I know you've got a full plate. The holiday season is also here, but you have squeezed this in, so I appreciate it, my friend. Thank you so much again for joining us. So, DREION, I want to start with your life in the beginning because, as I said in the intro, you have gone through a lot of stuff, and you have referenced God and music as the two biggest reasons to help you overcome those trials and tribulations. So talk to me about yourself. So you grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. I think I read that correct. Is that right?
Correct.
What was that like for you?
So for me, Omaha, Nebraska is it's one of the biggest, smallest cities that you'll probably go to. And many people, when they think of Nebraska, they think of, cornfields and farms and horses and cattle and all that stuff. But I grew up in the city. Omaha is the biggest city in Nebraska. It's very urban. And I actually grew up in the north side of Omaha, which is where predominantly people of color live. And in the time that I was growing up there was not a lot of development in the city. So I grew up in what we would call the projects. I grew up in the hood. I grew up in spaces and places in Omaha that there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of gang violence, especially because everything's so close knit. And so I grew up around a lot of difficult stuff, a lot of adult stuff, because I was the first child, the first grandchild, the first nephew, the first. So I saw a lot of crazy things as a child, and my mother was very young. She was, I like to say, she was a child raising a child, and so there was a lot of things that I saw that I shouldn't have seen, a lot of things that I dealt with that I probably shouldn't have dealt with, but I also was in that. It was also the flip side of it was I was also exposed to some of the best music, to some of the best um, artists, such as Prince and Parliament Funkadelic and Bootsy Collins and my grandfather, he loved these artists. He would play them openly whenever I would go to his house. And so my uncle and my grandfather were the two individuals that introduced me to some of these legendary artists like Earth, Wind, and Fire and things. And so, as a young child, I absorbed a lot of adult things on both sides of the spectrum. I was also a very energetic child that because I was the only child at the time, there was a lot of things that I was, loving to get into, loving to do. But music was the thing that I was just so attached to. I loved playing drums. I loved singing, and I loved church. And so for me, that really was kind of the start of my childhood. Being exposed to the things that weren't so good, but also being exposed to the things that were really, really integral in my development as an artist today as well.
Did you sing in a church choir as you were growing up or anything like that?
So when I was younger, I was kind of in and out of church. My aunt and uncle were I was going to church with my grandmother. I was going to church with my aunt and uncle. I was going to church with my aunt. There was a lot of different churches and things I was involved with. So I was never involved in an actual choir when I was a child, but I was always watching them. I was always seeing them. And so once I got into school, into elementary and into middle school and things like that, I joined choirs there. And once I got into high school, then I actually joined the church and I joined the choir and I played for the choir and I, became one of the lead worship leaders for the choir and things like that. So it eventually happened. It just happened later on in my life. But it was a very, very big part of my development as well as a musician.
Right. Right. I can relate to that in almost all facets. My family, we were in and out of churches growing up. We still talked about Christ and talked about God and prayed as a family and things of that nature, but I can also relate in the sense of I was exposed to a lot of things I probably shouldn't have been at a very young
Hmm.
age. I was exposed to violence, drugs,
Yeah.
alcohol abuse, all that stuff, and it hardens you in a way. Would you say that it did that for you?
Yeah, those are the same exact things that I was exposed to, and it definitely does. It almost, dissipates the innocence from from a lot of things, and it really kind of puts you in a position to have to kind of grow up at a very young age and have to, not only defend yourself but fend for yourself, because a lot of times you are the only one that is, I guess, to say in a sane mindset sometimes. And so you really have to deal with life very early on, and that was definitely my thing. I had a lot of trouble in school because of the environments that I was in, and that's what actually eventually um, opened the door for foster care and a lot of other unfortunate things in my life to take place.
Yeah, and we will definitely dive into that in a few short moments because something that I notice about you on The Voice and even now is that you do seem like a very upbeat individual, despite the fact that you went through all these trials and tribulations. And the reason why I can see it and I relate is because I don't know where you stand on this, but growing up the way that I did, I grew up very poor. You talked about project housing. That's what I grew up in as well. I grew up with cockroaches crawling all around us as we slept. It was me and all my brothers, and we shared one twin mattress. So there was a
Yeah,
lot of struggles. There was a lot of things that we had to overcome mentally. And
yeah,
despite the fact that we're all in it together,
yeah.
at the end of the day, you're in here by yourself. So how are you able, at this juncture in your life, able to turn everything that you went through into positive spirits and uplifting spirits and even advocacy for the foster care system?
The biggest thing is that, I always say that in all of the times in my life, but especially in foster care, I had God in music. I loved church and I loved the atmosphere, the feeling, there was always something that attached me to it. And so for me, um, putting those two things together, especially in my life, gave me a reason and a desire to move forward or push forward towards something. So life was just life. You just dealing with whatever the cards that you're, dealt. It's not like I was
Right.
like, oh, my life can be any better or it should be. It was just like, I'm a kid. This is what I was born into. Cool. I'm used to it. It's unfortunate, but it was the reality. It wasn't, But what was difficult was dealing with, as you said, um, the, the mental blockage that happens when you see violence or you see things that are very, very traumatizing. Being able to express or the lack of being able to express the trauma is definitely what was the biggest difficulty for me. And so the only way that I could express it was through music. So that was a staple for me, because the other alternatives were through anger, through lashing out, and all these other things that just aren't good. And those things happen too. But one thing that leveled me and that kept me like in a different world sometimes was music. And that for me, is how I kept that kind of that optimism. It was never like, oh, I'm gonna make this a positive thing. It was just like, I need something to be an outlet. I need something to be, to take me to another place. And for me, that's when I got into, just singing and singing out loud, and listening to the songs that I loved, or singing the songs or learning the songs that I loved. And then I got into instruments, and that, a lot of those things just took up my time and took up my interest.
And you were able to jump on the back of that and really ride it, as opposed to doing dangerous things, right? I mean,
Yeah,
for the people who don't know that life, I am proud of myself because I'm 31 years old. I went through that life, and I could have been addicted to crack. I could have
absolutely.
been violent. I could have been a gang member. I could even at this point in my life be abusive with alcohol. And I'm not
Absolutely.
any of those things. I reflect on it, no pun intended, the Reyes reflection. I reflect on it and I think to myself, I say, you know, if the worst thing that you did was a couple of things that you know now that you would never do,
Hmm.
you could be proud of yourself. And it's really hard for someone who's on the outside looking in. And I'm with you. I am 100% with you. When I'm in that life, it's almost like there's something better, but you don't know what better could be because you're so accustomed to your surroundings and your environment.
Right.
So completely agree with everything you said there. Growing up, you talked about your love of music and the different genres of music and how you played instruments as an outlet to avoid falling into those traps of drugs, alcohol, violence, etc. Aside from Earth, Wind, and Fire, Prince, who else were some of your biggest influences growing up?
So I actually have a holy trinity. My holy trinity is James Brown, Michael Jackson, and Prince. Those are the top tier guys that, and what I would say, have shaped my artistry, shaped my musical mind and interest, and are the ones that I wanted to emulate and be like, and um, walk in the shoes of. And one of the most incredible things is that I've, in many ways, I have developed into that just from listening and watching so many videos and studying them. They were my teachers and are my teachers. And so those are the top three for me. But you also still have Earth, Wind, and Fire. Philip Bailey from Earth, Wind, and Fire. You have, Ronald Isley from the Isley Brothers, Al Green, Maxwell, Eric Benet, and I mean, and the list goes on for me in terms of, the artists that really shaped my vocal ability and the people that I listen to. And even when you go into the gospel, side of it and realm of it, Shirley Caesar, Kurt Franklin, um, the Clark sisters, you like the list goes on for me. John P. Key. I mean, there's just so many that have really kind of become this like conglomerate of melting, this melting pot of people that kind of make up the DREION sound and the DREION look and the DREION style. That just is uh, a list that I probably can be sitting here listening for days. Those are a few.
And you're rattling them off. That's how you know you grew up with it and you were in the
Yeah.
trenches of these artists because you're just going. So I love that. I love that. I want to flip the page onto this next chapter of your life, and
Hmm.
that's the foster care system.
Hmm.
I don't want to butcher the story, so I want to give you the platform here to
Hmm.
just spill your guts about it. Can you talk about what you remember about that day?
So yeah, as I said, as a child, seeing a lot of adult things and growing up in a lot of adult things, uh, there were a lot of traumatic things um, that made uh, me as a child, a 7-year-old child, very upset, very emotional, very, and I just, even though I had music, there was still more, and on the inside, I had a lot of difficulty in school because of it, because I didn't have many people to talk to about the situation. And so I lashed out in many different ways. And that particular day was one of those days. I don't remember exactly what took place or what happened on that end, but I just remember I got in trouble in class. They called my mother up to the school. It had been um, maybe the second or third time that week that something had happened. And my mother, she, was a single mother, and she had a job, and she was trying to take care of me and trying to take care of us. She couldn't afford to keep having to leave her job to come and get me, and so she was fed up. She was fed up, and she came up to the school and disciplined me openly in front of the school. Or openly in the hallways, she was, trying to, use a tactic of embarrassment, to kind of get me to be like, she should stop doing this, and it backfired. And the police were called, the school security and counselors and things got involved. And, immediately from that moment, I was snatched from my mother, and I was questioned by the police on that day in the office. And I remember the counselor's office that I was sitting in was across the hall from the administration office. So there's this, window that you can see into the other office. And so I'm sitting there in this chair as the police are questioning me, and I keep seeing family members that I grew up with come in, and they're all coming up to the school. I don't know exactly why, but I just see, my father comes in, my aunt comes in, my grandmother comes in, into the other office while the police are questioning me, and I'm just sitting there. The police leave, and I'm just sitting there watching them. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to leave with them. Um, because it seems like the police made it seem like I was in danger. And so I tried to tell them, I'm not in any danger at home. My mom is not, doing anything to me, but this situation was just not good. And so the next thing I know is the police come in. They basically say, that they're going to, you know, put me in the police car, and they're going to take me to a temporary home. And I'm just, I'm 7 years old. I don't quite understand what's happening, what's going on. And they walk me out, they escort me out, and my mother is standing outside or is sitting outside in her car, and she, runs up to me, and she, kisses me and tells me that she loves me. And trying to ask her what's going on. Why am I not going with you? What's happening? And she can't really tell me because she doesn't know either. And so they put me in the police car, and I'm panicking in the police car because I don't know what's going on, and I'm trying to figure out from the police officer, what's happening, where am I going, what is this, what is that? Like, I don't know anything. I don't have any of my stuff. I went to school that day, and so I don't have any luggage or any clothes. I don't have anything. I don't know where I'm going. And I asked the police officer, I said, where am I? I said, am I ever going to see my mother again? And he said, I don't know, kid. And then I asked him, I said, well, where am I going? He said, you're going to a foster home. Never had heard that term before. And we pull up to this home. I'm 7 years old. I grew up in North Omaha, but I absolutely don't know every street and every, So we pull up somewhere I've never been, and he drops me off, uh, and drives away. And I'm sitting in this random lady's house, and I don't even know what to think. I don't know if this is the place I'm going to be living for the rest of my life. I don't know if, like, I have no idea. I think one of the most difficult days of my life as a child, knowing that, or scariest days. I mean, you get you wake up that day, you go to school, and then you don't go home. And nobody has any answers for you. Nobody can tell you. The foster mother, couldn't tell me anything because she didn't know anything. They just dropped me off. And I didn't take that very well. Did not take that very well. That was a very hard day. It's a very hard night. Um, and it was the beginning of a spiral for me, especially for that time, because if I already had issues, it that was definitely not going to make anything better. Um, so that's essentially how that first day went.
Do you still have nightmares or traumatic flashbacks from that day?
Not necessarily nightmares or traumatic flashbacks. I think the biggest thing is that when I relive those kind of things, I can feel the anxiety that I felt in those moments. I've talked about it a lot, and I'm still having to go to counseling for a lot of the things that transpired while I was in the foster care system. But I'm still digging through it. One thing about being in the foster care system, anybody that's ever been to the foster care system will tell you that it's a very unique experience that has to be worked through in some type of therapeutic way. Because it's overstimulation. It's, especially if you're young and you don't know what's happening, you're missing pieces, and the thing about the foster care system is that at that time that I was in it, it was not built for people that looked like me. You got dropped off and many times forgot about, or you were just another number, or you were just another, piece of property, now a ward of the state that they were quote unquote responsible for, but didn't have much respect for. And so you weren't taken care of. You weren't always the first priority. Uh, you were a lot of times, just in limbo. For 2 weeks, I didn't know where I was. My mother didn't know where I was. Nobody had communicated to my mother where I was. Uh, and yeah, you can imagine not having any clue of what was going on for 2 weeks is insane for a 7-year-old.
Right, because you as a 7-year-old, you don't even know the world, what it has to offer. We talked about earlier about how you, even though we know that we weren't really in necessarily the greatest world,
Yeah,
maybe because of depictions from TV, reading books, etc., it's still the world that you know.
right,
And to be plugged from that and then put in a different one, it's almost like you're like, wait a minute, I would trade that world
right.
in a heartbeat. I hear a lot of what you're saying, and it's very hard to understand it, obviously, for anybody who has not gone through that. The reason why I say that personally is just because I grew up with a mother who also believed that her hand was the firm hand of the law, if you know
Yeah,
what I mean, and would openly tell people that she would discipline us at home. And I remember an instance in which we started to catch on and we started to know that there was this thing called DSS. We started to know that DSS and what they did, and they took kids who were maybe not in a fortunate situation or if they were being abused at home. And I remember my brother saying to my mother, my older brother, saying, well, I'll call DSS if you hit us. And my mom took the
mm,
phone off the little holder and hit him off the head with it and said, here you go, call them. And I share this not because I want to get my mother in trouble or want to make her seem like she's this awful woman. I love my mother. I revere my mother.
yeah,
I share this because that's how I grew up. So I
yeah,
grew up with, like, if we got fresh and out of line, it was backed by violence.
yeah,
If we acted up, it was backed by violence. I grew up with very similar to you in I would lash out. I would get angry because you have all these emotions, you have all these feelings, and you don't know how to process them in a healthy way. And we don't know how to articulate them, and we don't know how to say, I'm scared or I'm angry. So
Right.
what do? We hit a kid, or we steal something, or we swear at a teacher. Whatever the case may be, that's how I grew up as well. I understand that.
Yeah.
And when I got home, my mom let me know what what was up. And
Right.
I think everybody can, connect the dots on that. I share that because in a way, I feel fortunate that I didn't have to go through what you went through, because I very well could have. Very easily, an adult could have seen that and said, this child is being abused. Now, did I take it as abuse? No, I took it as
No.
discipline. I took it
Right.
as discipline, right? And to a degree, I kind of feel like that's the way of the world. And I've said this on other podcasts, and I'll say it here, that a lot of the world's rules that we follow is because it's backed by violence. And I share that, and I've had people say, that's not true. We live in a peaceful society. And I'm not saying we don't. I'm not saying we don't. But why I say that is because let's say you or I were to get a speeding ticket, and we're like, and we get the speeding ticket in the mail, and we are like, no, these people can go ahead and kick rocks, pound sand. I'm not paying the speeding ticket. They're going to tack on more money. Then they're going to go ahead and they're going to take my car. And if I still am not paying this speeding ticket, they're going to do enough to the point where they have to get me in a court. And if I don't go to court, they're going to go ahead and fine me, put me in handcuffs, and physically bring me to court. And so why I share all that is to say that the threat of violence is always there. That's why we pay our speeding tickets when we
Yeah.
get them, because we don't want it to get to that level. So I'm asking this question, and it might be a controversial question, and it might be a question that you don't want to answer, and that's fine. But in a way, do you feel like that there's some instances in which we know what abuse is and what discipline is, and some
Mhm.
people just take the abuse route instead of the discipline route? I think everybody is smart enough to say this is clear abuse or this is discipline. What's your stance on that in terms of abuse versus discipline?
Well, for me, I never thought I was abused. My
Same.
mother, didn't just, you know, do things just because she didn't like the way my face looked that day. Like she, I will say, anytime I was physically, reprimanded, it was mainly probably because I deserved it, and it was warranted. So for me, we live, and I think I would even say, even to what you're saying, the world we live in, it works by fear. There it's ruled by fear. The fear of I will be fined or I will be arrested or what can happen if I don't pay my parking ticket. The fear of, if I don't show up to work on time, I'm going to lose my job. The fear of, if I don't do such and such, thus and so is going to happen. That's just kind of the way that the world works. And that fear tactic goes back to, many different things that we're not going to get into historically. But that fear has been used in good ways and it's been used in bad ways. And so the difference, in my opinion, between fear or between discipline and abuse is really the intent. Is the intent of the way that you're using the fear. There's a way to have balance. Even as a father, you know, when I discipline my child, it is to teach them a lesson. It's to give them a context. It's to give them, an understanding of this is how things work and this is how things go. You know, a lot of parents in today's, age, in my opinion, are kind of more conscious of what physical discipline does to the psyche of their children, which is very very true. I believe some parents, and I believe my parents, I can say sometimes took it a little too far. Um, But I definitely will say that understanding and that, training of this is what happens when you do thus and so is what gives balance and what makes people, at least be in a place and understanding that, okay, there are a set way that things are supposed to be done. The military teaches you very early on, and I was never in the military, but I come from a military family. They teach you very, very early on. If you're not going to do what we're asking you to do, you're going to learn the hard way. And the biggest lesson that you'll learn in life is everything is hard. You just have to choose your hard. Whether the hard is going to be learning from an experience and having something terrible happen, and now you've had to learn this lesson, or you have to go through the difficult growing pains of learning self-control and learning, discipline. These things are super important. I don't believe that you always have to use physical discipline to discipline your children, but you do have to help them understand that there are ways that life works and the way that things go. And that fear and that understanding of fear is very, very important, I think, to the psyche of all humans in society. And so for me, that's where I stand on it. I do believe that there has to be discipline, that you can't just like not do it, because then you have a whole nother spectrum of people that go around not understanding how life works and not understanding that you have to respect people and their autonomy. And you have, like, there are a lot of people that I know that don't have respect. And I'm not saying, it's not because their parents did anything wrong, but I do believe that some people just weren't taught that there is a way to life. You have to walk around this world understanding that you don't just own everything. You can't just talk to people any kind of way. You can't just do whatever you want. And nobody owes you anything. Nobody owes you anything. And so these lessons, I think, are just really important, especially to teach your children and to teach children in general. So that's where I stand on it. As I said, I don't believe that physical reprimanding is always needed, but I grew up in a time where that's what you did. That's what happened. If you talk back, you get popped in the mouth.
Yeah, same,
You know,
same.
and it doesn't have to be extreme. You don't have to ring your children up from the ceiling, or not throwing them against what, like that's a whole nother set of things. But you know popping or what we call whooping, or spanking or whatever you want to call it, you know, it definitely it definitely enforces that fear and shows that there are consequences to your actions, and that's the point of it all. There are consequences to your actions, whether those consequences are good if you do something good, or bad if you do something bad, and that's just kind of one plus one equals two.
I think you said it perfectly. I couldn't have said it better myself. So I'll move on to this next question. How did the foster care system shape who you are now?
So this is the challenge of the foster care system. The foster care system, especially when I was growing up in it, was immensely behind in the development of of how the foster care system affect the children that were in it. They were not as mindful of the placements. They were not as critical of the individuals that they allowed to be foster parents, because people are getting checks to take care of these children, and so they're not. There was a lot of, in my opinion, um, neglect, and even from the therapist side of it, I've spoken to therapists, especially from the time that I was in the foster care system, who have told me, we got paid, every time we prescribed a medication to a child, and so we were like guinea pigs. They were just giving us anything. Say, oh, they're lashing out. Just give them this sedative. Just give them this. This. I was on an antidepressant at 7 years old. I was on an antipsychotic medication at 7 years old. I was on at least four. different medications that all did different. I was so sedated because they felt that I was lashing out. That they were just sedating me to the point where I just didn't want to even move. I was almost in a stupor. So the way that the foster care system, you know, affected me and shaped me once I got out of it. So I wasn't in it my entire life. I was in it for about 6 to 8 months. There was a period, and I was eventually placed back with my mother. But when I was in the system, I was in five different foster homes, four different medications. I was, in psych wards. I have two different psych wards in that time, and that really just completely changed my life because I was exposed to the world. I was no longer under the protection because, again, my mother loved me. My mother cared about me. She wanted me to have a future, which is why she even wanted to discipline me and teach me so that I could live. Because where I come from, if the lack of discipline, could get you killed, so,
Yeah.
she was essentially trying to save my life. And so I was exposed to the world that she was trying to protect me from at a very early age, learning that people don't care about you. People don't have to take care of you. People don't, for instance, as a 7-year-old kid, I learned that Santa Claus wasn't real or the Tooth Fairy wasn't real. I'm losing teeth as a child, putting them under my bed, and the Tooth Fairy never come you know and that sounds like but as a child, to learn that way, you learn very early on that nobody has to take care of you, nobody has to watch out for you. There's other older kids that I'm in these foster homes with that have been abused and that have been through just as much as I've been through or even more, that come in angry, that take their anger out on you. I was bullied very, very profusely. I remember being pushed downstairs. I remember being constantly bullied and beat up by the kids. There was a time they used to use these, the lights and flicker them on and off using a strobing effect, so it makes it hard to move. And they would just, you know, uh, kick me and punch me and beat on me. There was so many things that took place on both ends, whether it was the foster care system, whether it was the foster youth that I was in the system with, whether it was the foster parents not caring a lot about me. I had a foster parent that had a gambling problem that would leave me by myself in the middle of the night. Um, Man, there's so many things, and the way that that's shaped me today and has kind of it's left this mark. You talk about trauma, you talk about living in the projects and things like that, almost doesn't compare to the neglect that you receive, almost being considered property more than a human being in the foster care system. Almost, you get treated you know, just as much as a slave, because you're just there. They have an obligation to take care of you because you belong to the state, but they don't have to give you anything more than, the home that you're in, because at any point in time, you really, you could go missing. I've heard many of stories of children being, put into sex trafficking. This stuff happens in the foster care system all the time. But to get to my point is that it's left such an indelible mark on my life that I have to go to therapy. I have to, talk this out. I still am uncovering how deep foster care and the traumas that I received in foster care have affected me in my adulthood, has affected me as a parent, has affected me as an advocate now today, having to relive my story, telling foster youth who are in similar situations now, and to understand and know that in 20 years, this hasn't changed. The kids that are in foster care now are still dealing with the same things that I dealt with, going from home to home, carrying your belongings in a black trash bag. That's still happening today. And it definitely was difficult for me to be able to relive over and over and over again. But the strength that I've gained from telling that over and over and over, and the people that have come to me and said, "Oh my God, your story," is it I went through this, or I know somebody that went through it. It makes me, it gives me strength to be able to say, you know, that I've changed somebody's life, or I've helped somebody, or I gave somebody hope because they heard my story and they were like, okay, if he can make it out, I can make it out too.
I won't sit here and pretend I know what you went through. I can relate to, as I mentioned, the upbringing of just your environment. But in terms of that, I won't sit here and play pretend. And you've inspired me. And I didn't even go through that. I hear what you went through. And the fact that you've worked so hard to be an advocate, a family man, a great performer, a good person, when you could have easily fallen into cracks of depression. And I'm sure you had your moments. I'm not, I'm
Yeah.
sure you had your moments, but you could have easily fallen into this deep pit of hopelessness and depression and constant angst. But instead, you've overcome that and you've turned it into advocacy and just powerful testimonies. So I'm proud of you for what that's worth. You are an inspiration to me, even though I don't exactly know what that's like. And I hope that anybody who listens to this can be impacted in some way, even
Hmm.
though you may not go through everything that you have went through or I've gone through, but to pick something out of it and say, wow, I remember an instance when I was a kid, or I know someone, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of you, man, for what that's worth. I'm so glad that you opened up and shared those stories because I know that's not easy. And I know that we could probably sit here for another hour or two
Yeah.
and talk about all the other stuff about, like you said, the sex trafficking. I'm aware of that type of stuff as well. I didn't experience it, but I know about it, and I know people that have gone through it. So, again, I just want to circle back to the main point that I'm super proud of you, and you are a true inspiration. And I hope that no matter what you go through in life, you always hold on to the fact that you've inspired myself and many others. So, I
Thank
want to talk about your advocacy work now. I read something that said you worked with an organization titled, I believe it's First Star Academy and the Mixed Roots Foundation. Can you talk about what kind of work you do with those organizations?
So yeah, so First Star Academy is actually three of them. So it's First Star Academy, Mixed Roots Foundation, and Music is Unity. I've worked with all three of those foster care organizations. They all are, either foundations, organizations that specifically work with foster youth, or provide funding and resources to foster youth across the country, and many different facets. So First Star Academy specifically works with foster youth in high school that are transitioning into college, and they help them figure out and find what they want to do, what career path they want to go down, and they help them uh, receive the tools to be able to not only graduate high school, but then also go into college, get into college, get scholarships, and the resources that they need to be able to move on into their careers and their lives. Because a lot of these foster youth, when they age out of the system, they a lot of them end up homeless. They don't have, because they don't have any direction. They've been taught zero things about life, and they are being told, okay, great, now you're no longer our responsibility because you're a legal adult. Go out in the world and be great. And a lot of them have no idea what that even is. And so these organizations definitely give them the resources to be able to do that. And I'm proud to work with these organizations because they directly impact the foster youth and work with them and give them the resources that they need, the mentorship that they need, the connections that they need to be able to maintain themselves outside of their current situation and moving forward into their adulthood. Mixed Roots Foundation, again, is also another organization that I work with that does a similar thing, and they put on a lot of events to raise money and funding for these foster youth in terms of supplies that they need, especially like during uh, uh, 2020 when we had the pandemic, we had COVID. there was a lot of emergency funding that was raised by these organizations specifically to make sure that foster youth had food, had supplies for schooling, because now schooling is now online. They couldn't afford the internet, or they couldn't afford the computers or anything like that, and so they help provide those things. And then Music is Unity is another organization that actually is what connected me to Earth, Wind, and Fire. Music is Unity is Philip Bailey's foster care organization from Earth, Wind, and Fire, that he began and that he started almost 14 years ago, just to help foster youth aging out of the system have the resources that they need to be able to age out, whether that be housing, whether that be supplies or resources that they need to go on to college or to just go into their respective jobs or careers. And they also help fund other organizations, which is even more helpful, because a lot of these organizations are are 401c. They are donation based, and so any money that they are giving to the foster youth or for the foster cause is having to be raised. And so they have to put on these events. They have to put on these things to be able to get people to understand that the reason why this is important is because these youth don't have anybody. These youth don't have anyone giving them anything, because life has hit them at a time, way earlier than the age of 18. And so they need somebody to look out for them. And so we raise awareness, and we make sure through the advocacy work that we are bringing attention to this cause, not just because, oh, look at these poor foster youth. No, these are individuals, these are people, these are human beings that need help, that have nobody. And you giving $5 is more than enough help, especially if we have 500 people or 1,000 people that give $5. That changes somebody's life and their situation. And then another way that we advocate is through music, obviously, because for me, that is one of the biggest ways that I've been able to express my my story, the things that I've been through, and can relate to the foster youth, the most in terms of just having an outlet of what of emotions that I've been dealing with in terms of my experience in the foster care system. And so we put on events with these foster care organizations where I'll perform, or I'll show a performance, or I'll speak to the students and tell my story. We'll do events where they can ask me questions, where I can mentor them, where I can give them opportunities just to relate to my story or to tell me their story and give them encouragement. And so it's really changed my life and helped me find my community, especially because, to be honest, when you talk about foster care, there are a lot of people that don't know anything about it. As you said, you've never been through it. So, out of sight, out of mind, it's never been brought to your attention. You've never had to deal with it. And so why would you find it to be important? Um, and I think that it's really important for, foster youth to have a community that understands them, because when you talk to people and you tell them, oh, I went through this or I dealt with this, many people can't relate. So they don't know how to show up for you. And finding this community of not only youth but of people who work with these youth and have a passion to be able to change the system and the laws, and get rid of for-profit organizations and people that are trying to take advantage of these youth. It's so incredible, because I needed that when I was in the foster care system. It would have been extremely helpful to me to have somebody like me come in and say, hey, listen, I understand that this is, but you don't have to end up like this. You don't have to end up, because foster youth get a bad name. They tell you that you can't do this, you won't be this, you won't be that, because of your circumstance or where you come from, and a lot of them believe it. And if I had somebody like me to be like, hey, you're going to be all right. You're going to end up on world stages one day. It would have given me that much more motivation to be able to do what I've done. But I had to do it myself, and many youth don't have that. And so for me, that's what's the importance about advocacy, is being what I needed when I was in the foster care system.
Yeah, you see yourself in these kids, and you think about what you could do
Mhm.
based on your experiences to help them out. which I think is fantastic. That's what we all should do. And you've inspired me to even look up foster care organizations in my local area
Yeah.
and how can I help out even if I volunteer for a weekend. You've inspired me. So I appreciate that, my friend. I want to ask a few more questions before we wrap up. Your song, Let It Rain, from your debut project, was featured in a movie called Foster Boy.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
So that movie is very, very special because it tells the story of every foster child, you know, and just gives insight to the experience of what the foster care system is like. Now, there's many different experiences. I'm not going to say that this is the only experiences. I've heard people who have said that my foster care experience was actually pretty good. I had a pretty good family. But many foster youth in the system have experienced what that movie has portrayed in terms of the neglect and the lack of care that the system has given to the youth. And that opportunity to have my music in that movie actually came through the foster care organizations that I was working with. One of the founders of First Star Academy, Peter Samuelson, was actually one of the executive producers on the film, and it was also executive produced by Shaquille O'Neal and an incredible writer named Jay. He's out of Chicago. Can't remember his last name right now, but he actually is a lawyer that works with these foster youth, and it was the stories of the youth that he has worked with that he used to tell this story. And so after seeing the movie, I couldn't even get through it without crying because I was reliving so many of the same uh, experiences that the young man in the movie goes through, and I was just seeing myself all over again. And then so to see it, and then for them to ask me if they could put my music in it, I mean, it was the beginning of healing for me because to allow me to be a part of a movie that even almost tells my story and then take the music that I use to tell my story and put it together, it was like magic. It was like magic. And the movie, I'm just so thankful for that movie and to be a part of it because the organizations that pushed for me to be a part of it, as soon as they heard my music, they said we got to put them in. They were done filming. They were done with the movie. They were ready to do it. They went back and re-edited the movie to add my music in. And that to me just was the beginning of healing for me, to be a part of that movie. And then to go and watch it and to see it. It was on Amazon. It's still on Amazon. It's on BET. It's on all of the major streaming platforms for movies, and to be able to tell people, listen, you can go and watch this movie that I'm a part of, that I have, my art is a part of. It really just brought things full circle for me. And every time I watch that movie, it gives me pride to know that I was a part of this huge moment for foster youth and letting people in. So if you really want to understand and know the experience of foster youth and what they're going through and dealing with, I highly recommend the movie Foster Boy, because it also tells you not only the side of the foster youth, but the corrupt side that comes from for-profit organizations that are, you know, taking these contracts from the government and then selling these children for money into foster homes and placing them into homes that they know are not going to work, and knowing that they're going to get money because they're going to get the child back and then placed again. So every time they get a placement, they get another $5,000 or whatever it is. And they were taking that money and pocketing that money, and so they're taking advantage. So when I say they were taking advantage of the children like property or treating us like property, I was placed in 5 different foster homes. That was 5 different checks that an organization that were placing these youth got. And so imagine there's over 400,000 foster youth in the system in America alone right now. You do the math.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking to hear. And I just looked it up while you were saying it. Yes, it's on Tubi, which is a free streaming service. So there's no excuses to not watching, and I will definitely be watching it, and I will circle back and let you know how that movie has moved me. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate that you were able to share that and that you were able to be a part of that. I think it's a blessing from God that you were able to use your story and be a part of a project that truly means something to you. I think a lot of people want to be a part of projects and then it has no meaning to them, whereas for you, this is who you are. And I'm glad that you were able to share that. I want to end with some rapid fire questions. Just one word, okay?
Yeah.
Try your best. I know that's hard, even for me as a
Yeah.
talker. All right. Snoop Dogg. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Unc. That's Uncle Snoop.
Unk. Unk status. For people who don't know, DREION got to be on the very first Team Snoop, the inaugural Team
Absolutely.
Snoop for this past season of The Voice. Experience of The Voice. One word.
Heartwarming.
Family.
Everything.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Mentors.
Stress.
A lot of it.
And I want to end with this. What gives you pure happiness?
God and music.
Amen. Amen. Before we wrap up, are there any projects that you are working on that you can share, that you want to plug in? At this moment in time, I just want you to plug yourself in. Where can people find you? All that good stuff.
Well, I'll say, I'll be working with Uncle Snoop going into 2025. I can't say exactly what yet, but just know that that will be coming. And you can follow me on all streaming platforms and all, social media platforms at DREION Nation, DREIONATION. And just look out. I already have music out on all these streaming platforms, but there's a lot more coming next year. Next year is going to be an incredible year.
Oh, man. All glory to God. My friend, you deserve it. You are an incredible human being. I'm so honored and blessed and thankful for God that I was able to have this interview with you. I know we had been trying to work at it for a couple weeks now, but we
Yeah,
finally made it work. And God has a plan. He has a will,
absolutely.
and I'm a servant for him. So thank you so much, DREION, for taking time out of your day, sharing this inspiring story, the journey that you went through. You are now forever a friend of the show. I've just knighted you. You're
Thank
basically an Avenger. Every time I call you up, you got to go ahead and help us out, help a bro out. No, I'm kidding. So I appreciate that, and I will definitely be following you so that way I can see your journey, see what you're up to. You now have a fan in life in me, not just because of your music, but because of the person that you are. So thank you again for doing this for me and for giving me this episode of the Reyes Reflection. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Of course. That is going to do it for this episode of the Reyes Reflection podcast. Big thanks to our sponsors, ARAVE Cards, Jocko Fuel, Mad Rabbit, and Smacking Sunflower Seeds. Big thanks to DREION for making this a successful episode. And to all our listeners, remember, may you live, may you love, and may you thrive. I'm Oprah as a dude, and I love you all.